Welcome to Native Talk Arizona, Native Health's Native American Cultural Affairs program, presented by Native Health and KRDP 90.7 FM. I'm Susan Levy. And with us today is Shelby Billison and Jeremy Romancito, and they are the co-owners of For Your Plate Only, a small food business that specializes in food vending, catering, sharing recipes, and tutorials. And I'm super excited to learn more. I did look up on their social media and all of the great products, and they had some really delicious looking things. So before we get started, Shelby and Jeremy, tell us a little bit about yourselves, your journey, and your backgrounds.
I just want to say we're really happy to be here. Thank you for having us. My name is Shelby. Twajini Nishle, Nashkala Dene, Bashashin, Sanajini Deshachedo, Nakaidene, Dashanella. I am Dine, and I'm from Winter Rock, Arizona.
Hello, Keshe. My name is Jeremy. I am Zuni and Laguna Pueblo. And yeah, that's where I'm from.
So how did you both get interested in doing, I was on your website and I read all of the things about you. How did you get interested, tell our listeners, on doing For Your Plate Only?
So Shelby and I, we met at the JW Marriott, and we found out that we were from the same area. And we decided, to go a new direction and bring our talents back to the reservation and surrounding areas.
Did you have any culinary background, either of you?
We both went to culinary school, formerly known as Lake Cordon Bleu, and then before that it was known as Scottsdale Culinary Institute.
Yep, I remember that, yep.
I went to school at Lake Cordon Bleu, and...
Yeah, I went to school there at Scottsdale Culinary Institute right after high school in 2006.
And I went to Lake Cordon Bleu in 2011, right after high school as well.
That is pretty cool.
And I worked in places and then decided to move to Phoenix.
And then I worked at a couple jobs in the Phoenix metro area, and then I ended up getting a job at the JW Marriott in Scottsdale there, and I stayed there for a little over 10 years.
And I was working there for 5 years. Like Jeremy said, this is where we met.
That's what a great story, and that you're from the same area, and now you're doing a business together. So I see that your food's kind of evolved over the years, and it looks, and maybe I'm wrong, but it looks to me like you're going back more towards indigenous foods and a lot of blue corn. Is that correct?
When we started our business, we actually moved home in 2019. So we moved back to Winter Rock, Arizona in 2019. This is when we decided to start our business. We did start doing blue corn items in 2019. I think they have gotten a lot better since then.
And in popularity too in this area.
Yeah, and we've kind of we've been doing a lot of R&D on a lot of our recipes. So yeah, they've definitely progressed into something a lot bigger than we thought they were going to be when we first started, for sure.
It looked like, I was reading about some of your Instagram posts and things like that, I know you've had a really tough time. I know COVID was very difficult, and hopefully all of that is behind you. And now things are getting bigger and better, and it looks like the business is really expanding, right?
COVID taught us a lot. When we first started, we started off as with hot foods and some pastries, yes. And then when COVID hit, since all the businesses were closed here and we weren't allowed to sell roadside, as we were doing, we were forced to lean more towards pastries.
Yeah, we had to adapt to all of the rules and the Navajo Nation being on lockdown here. So a lot of businesses weren't able to, I guess,
fully function.
Yeah, fully function. And the only businesses that were allowed to be open at that time were businesses with a drive-through. So like Jeremy was saying, when we first started, we were more interested in doing hot foods and savory items. And then when the pandemic hit is when we actually really honed in on blue corn pastries and a lot of other different types of pastries at that time.
Yeah, so it made us, we started pre-packaging them, that was so it was safe for pickups. And we scheduled pickups from around the local areas and parking lots. And people really started liking our blue corn pastries and other items. And that's what I think that's what helped us yet known for our pastries was because of COVID.
So
So
it's
yeah,
like,
we mostly do pastries now, and we also cater as well. But well, yes, people do know us for our blue corn pastries and cookies and things like that.
yeah, COVID was hard. Everybody, a lot of pivoting for a lot of people and trying to figure out what worked in a short amount of time and with the resources that you had. Do you use any other indigenous ingredients in your cooking or mostly the blue corn?
So we do utilize a lot of different types of ingredients. We try to utilize what's readily available to us here just because we're still a home-based business and it's hard for us to, I guess, get access to a lot of other types of ingredients we would normally have access to in the city. That's been kind of hard.
Definitely a challenge.
But yes, we do use locally sourced ingredients, and we also use ingredients that we've foraged ourselves. We've used juniper ash. We've used juniper berries. We actually utilize that a lot. We use the Navajo tea, chieftain, or the sumac berries. We've also used, we use a lot of like lavender and just like natural ingredients. We've used from around here as well.
Yeah, we would love to incorporate more, but the reality is like, if we have time to go out ourselves and harvest, we would do so. Or whenever we also do rely on people that will harvest, and we'll go to the local flea markets, and hopefully if they have ingredients that we can buy and purchase, we'll do that ourselves. So.
And we're very lucky to have, or I guess we're very fortunate to have customers and followers that do forage themselves. And we do reach out to them and ask for different items at different times as well, depending on the season.
Yes.
So what's your most popular item right now?
That's a really hard question.
The scones or something else?
We normally, this is hard for us to answer because when we do different like pastry sales, we try to take out like a different menu every single time we sell, and a majority of the time, they all do very well. So we do have like a little cult following for our blue corn biscotti. So we make a
blue corn pinion biscotti.
Yeah, blue corn pinion biscotti. That one is very popular. We do sell that biscotti to a small business out in Santa Fe who resells for us, which is really cool. We also have a lot of people that ask for the blue corn honey cookies that we make.
That one's pretty popular.
Yeah.
Our blue corn cake donuts.
Yeah.
That's another.
Those have their own cult following as well.
That's pretty cool. So the blue corn cake donuts, I think that's been on your Instagram, right? That was like listed as one of the top ones?
Yes.
Donuts?
Yeah, we do sell it quite often, yeah.
Yes.
And then are you thinking of experimenting like with any sumac jelly or anything else in it?
Maybe, but we had experimented with different glazes on top and different fruits.
Yeah, we try to change up our menu according to the season.
Correct. Yeah.
So whatever fruits are in season, we'll incorporate those, or whatever spices or anything like that that's in season, or whatever is readily available. We'll definitely incorporate it into our menus.
And I think one of our main goals too, like when we decided to quit our jobs and move back home, was to give people variety.
Yes.
So we like to not just keep the same thing all the time. We switch it up, and things like Shelby was saying, things that are in season we'll do, or make different menus depending on the season or preference for people, or whatever's readily available for us to use and cook with, and we'll do that.
Yep.
Pretty cool that you're both Le Cordon Bleu or the Culinary Institute trained. So what are you thinking? Are you ever going to bring your products down to Phoenix? Any plans for that?
Yeah,
there's been talk.
Yeah. We've been trying to get into the whole, we've been trying to get a vending spot down in Phoenix for a bit. It's just that we're a two-man team, so we travel back and forth to New Mexico, so we do quite a few sales in Albuquerque and Santa Fe, and then here on the Navajo Nation, and then we also go out to Farmington, Zuni, and Laguna. So we're kind of like everywhere.
We have been invited to some markets in Phoenix. We were going to this last time, but our schedules didn't align with us going there recently. So, but we do talk and plan on selling out there sometime, whether that be indigenous event or a farmers market out there.
Yeah, it would definitely be cool to go back. We haven't been to Phoenix in a while.
Yeah.
Well, you'll have to let us know when you come. So do you have any upcoming plans for this year of 2025? Are you planning on expanding or kind of just staying the course for a while and growing? Any particular thoughts on that?
So one of our biggest promises to ourselves that we kind of talked about at the beginning of this year was trying to be better about our mental health and our physical health and just all around, like, self-care type of thing, self-love. So we have been super stressed out and currently are experiencing kind of like a burnout from our business, just because it's just us two. And this year we really pushed ourselves to do as much business as we could. So what we were planning on doing next year was kind of taking a little step back so that we could go back and further our education, and both of us individually.
Yes, and have a chance to maybe like rebrand.
Yes.
And see which direction we can go
with our business
from like what we have and what we've built and what we've, with all the following that we have now. So
yeah, because we're always trying to learn something new, and we're super thankful for all of our customers and our followers and people who have been with us since we first started. We literally started selling our pastries out of the trunk of our car when we first moved back. So we're super happy to be where we are right now. It's just that we're kind of tired. So I think we're gonna take a step back and then try to figure out what it is, like Jeremy said, what it is we're really trying to do with our business next year.
Yeah.
It sounds like a good plan, but I think, I know that you've got the cult following and everybody loves your stuff, and hopefully you'll get some rest and relaxation and then come back with renewed energy. But in the meantime, if people are up at Window Rock and they want to check out your items and purchase anything, would they check your social media or website, or what would you recommend? And how do they contact you?
We are currently on Facebook and Instagram at For Your Plate Only. So the number 4 and then Your Plate Only. They can find us there on our socials. We're pretty active on both of them. You can just send us a direct message there if it's more convenient for you, or if anyone wants to reach out for catering or anything like that, you can also reach us at foryourplateonly@gmail.com. That's the best way to get a hold of us too, via email.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I hope that our listeners reach out to you, check you out at in Window Rock, and check your social media and email you if they've got any catering. And I certainly hope you come down to Phoenix and stop by. And I've heard the products that you sell are absolutely amazing and delicious, and we'd love to try them. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Coming up next on Native Talk Arizona, Susan Levy chats with Mariah Gladstone, founder of Indigi Kitchen. Support for KRDP 90.7 FM comes in part from Native Health, with 2 locations in Phoenix, 4041 North Central Avenue, Building C, near the corner of Central Avenue and Indian School Road, and at 2423 West Dunlap Avenue. Native Health is also located in Mesa at 777 West Southern Avenue near the corner of Southern Avenue and Extension Road. Native Health provides primary medical, dental, behavioral health, WIC, and wellness services for the urban Native American community. For more information, call 602-279-5262 or visit our webpage at nativehealthphoenix.org.
Hey, I want her, hey,
Welcome back to Native Talk Arizona, Native Health's Native American Cultural Affairs program, presented by Native Health and KRDP 90.7 FM. I'm Susan Levy. Indige Kitchen is an online cooking show on YouTube dedicated to re-indigenizing our diets. On the phone with us is Mariah Gladstone. She's the founder of Indige Kitchen, and we're super excited that she's here. I've watched the videos. I've read your website, and I'm very, very impressed. So hello, Mariah, and welcome to Native Talk Arizona.
Hi there, and thank you so much for having me.
I can't wait to hear what you have to say. So before we get started, tell us about yourself, your journey, and how you got interested in all of this.
Yeah, I am both Blackfeet on my father's side as well as Cherokee on my mother's side, but I grew up in northwest Montana, just outside of the Blackfeet Nation, and I was really fortunate in the way that I grew up, that I was exposed to the magic of gardens and watching food come from the land and getting to work with all of those things and, you know, growing up in the kitchen space. And so I actually initially went to college for environmental engineering, but cooking was always an outlet. It was a source of stress relief. It was a creative brain exercise. It was all of those things. And when I got back home after college, I was living on the reservation, both during my summers back home as well as afterwards. I quickly realized there was such an immediate need for a revitalization of that knowledge around our traditional foods. And so kind of on a whim, I decided that I wanted to be able to share the knowledge that I have, but also to continue learning. And it was from that base that I started Indige Kitchen. It's a combination of Indigenous, digital, and kitchen. And it is a way of using digital media, online teaching tools, and now, of course, expanded to in-person teaching as well. But it's a way of using those resources that we have in order to re-indigenize our diets.
Very cool. So how did you, besides, you know, like being back home and cooking and things like that, do you have like a culinary background? Did you do any cooking schools, or it's just things that you've learned and know?
I am entirely self-taught. So I grew up experimenting a lot in the kitchen. I have recipes written down from when I was 3 years old in marker with very creative spellings because my mom allowed me to create things as long as she was supervising, and I got to experiment a lot with food. But no, my formal academic education is engineering and then later environmental science.
So what do you remember, since you started when you were 3, what do you remember cooking when you were little?
You know, a lot of the things that I cooked when I was really little that my mom started me with was actually her secret way of teaching me fractions. One of those things was banana bread, right? You grew up baking a lot, I think, as a kid. And my mom would always have me doubling recipes, or, oh, we have to cut this recipe in half. And it was a very Montessori hands-on method of teaching me how to double things, right? Because you can physically see that 1/2 cup is the same, or 2 1/2 cups is the same as 1 cup, because you're seeing those physical amounts and you're having an understanding of that. I didn't realize that she'd actually taken an early childhood development class that said that kids that grow up cooking learn fractions really well. And so that was her sneaky way of doing that. But she didn't realize that by teaching me the premise of the basic ingredients that went into things like breads and cakes and cookies and things like that, is I would start having ideas, and I would wake up with dreams of how to make new recipes. And so she would let me experiment with things, and I was really lucky. She just made sure I didn't burn the kitchen down, and the worst case scenario, if it didn't turn out, we lost a little bit of flour and sugar and butter and stuff like that. But it gave me an opportunity to feel
much more confident and creative in that kitchen space.
So when you started doing like the Indige Kitchen, do you remember, so did you start with like one indigenous ingredient and say, I want to use pemmican or bison, or did you dabble in everything? What was the initial thought and premise and work behind it?
Yeah, my starting with Indige Kitchen was always to use all indigenous ingredients. So things that could have been found on Turtle Island prior to 1492. But also I wanted to use them in ways that made sense in the modern kitchen, ways that were approachable for people and that people today would recognize as foods. So not necessarily like wood-fired cooking techniques, so I've definitely done some of that. But a lot of things that are using, Instapots and crock pots and, whatever the tool might be, to use our ancestral ingredients, but in ways that are merged together today. So, a really good example of something like that is foods that come from both my Blackfeet and my Cherokee ancestors, and that's bison and butternut squash lasagna, right? So taking a winter squash, using it to make a substitute for lasagna noodles, and then, of course, making a rich meat sauce with ground bison, but also tomatoes, which are also, of course, indigenous to here, and then seasoning it with seasonings both that are fairly common in our spice cabinet today, like garlic powder and things that, we might have in our spice cabinet, like oregano, or its indigenous substitute, which is bee balm or wild bergamot. They taste almost identical. And to be able to make something that people are familiar with, which is a lasagna, using these ancestral ingredients, but in a way that is super simple. There's not very many ingredients involved, but also is achievable to people and that kids are willing to eat, and all of these things merging into a recipe that works for us today.
So what's your favorite recipe right now that you're making?
Ooh, that's always such a difficult thing. I get so distracted easily, and so I tend to like some things and then I'll quickly change to something else. So I've been using my smoker a lot lately, actually, and I've been smoking bison meat and elk meat and doing kind of this rich, slow-cooked, really tender wild game, which is a great way of using a tough, lean piece of meat and turning it into something that's delicious and tender and smoky, and then to be able to use that in a whole bunch of different ways. So, using smoked bison brisket and then making like an elderberry barbecue sauce, and then you can make rice bowls with that, or you can make little corn tortillas and make little elderberry bison tacos and things like that. You can put them in arepas and make little sandwiches, or you can take that same smoked bison brisket and you can make a green chili sauce for it, and you can make rice bowls out of that, and it has a completely different flavor, but the base ingredient's the same. And that's really easy, because if I'm going to use my smoker and take the time to smoke a bison brisket, I'm going to try to get a whole bunch of different meals out of that same ingredient without getting bored throughout the week. So that's something I've been liking a lot lately, but it's also the end of hunting season, and so I have a lot of meat right now, and I'm sure later on I will get some other type of favorite recipe.
So, and I know you're up north, so your indigenous ingredients are very different than the ones we have down in the Southwest. How would you recommend that people, if they're listening and they kind of want to dabble and try different indigenous ingredients, what would you recommend that they start with? So would it be finding what's in your area? Would it be ordering online? What would you recommend to sort of dip your toes into getting into this?
Yeah, I think that one of the first things that people can do is to learn more about the plants in their area. And whenever I'm traveling to new places, especially as I travel across the country and across the continent, I'll find myself in places where I'm not familiar with the plants. And so one of the first things I do is walk around wherever I'm staying, if it's a hotel or with friends, wherever it might be, and I'll use a plant identification app. There's a couple different options, but several of them are free, and you can pull those up on your phone, and then you can go and take pictures of plants, and you can start identifying plants pretty easy to look up the Wikipedia pages of those plants right from there, and then you can start to read about those things. You can start to understand culinary uses. You can start to connect with the traditions of those plants, and then you start to see the world from a different way. So that's one of the things that I've done a lot. I've done it in Arizona. I think I took myself on a little plant walk the last time I was in Tucson, just because I was like, these plants are so different than Montana plants, and just being able to kind of shift my whole mindset and start to look at all the gifts the land is giving, and then of course how to give back to those places too. But for some folks, they may not always have access to like local farms, or if you're in a city, that may be a little bit more difficult. Of course, that can also be easier in some ways to connect with foods depending on where you're at. I think that if people connect with local farmers, that's a great way of finding local plants. But also, some people have family that hunts. There's ways of connecting with wild game and things like that. But I would also recommend sourcing or buying from native producers. And so there's a website that's put together by the Intertribal Agricultural Council, and it's the American Indian Foods Program. And on there they have a directory of indigenous producers that are participating in their producer program, and so they have a stamp that's certified Native American agricultural product, and you can go on there and you can find different products. You can look by state, you can look by type of product. So if you're looking for wild rice, you can find a ton of native wild rice harvesters. You can find blue cornmeal online. You can find bison jerky. You can find native grown olive oil that's grown in California by California tribes. So there are an abundance of resources on that way. But I think that just looking around and finding out some of the foods from your area is really great. And then also I would say if you're on social media, to find like a local foraging group. Doesn't necessarily have to be a native group, though I would look up like Robin Kimmerer's The Honorable Harvest to observe some ethical practices for harvesting wild. But if you find a local foraging group, you're going to see other people sharing pictures of the plants that they're seeing for harvest, and you're going to see not only the identifications, you're going to start learning some of those plants, but you'll also see what is in season, because people will be posting, I just saw this today, so you have an idea of what the plants in your area look like at that time of the year. And so that will help give you a better sense of cycles and when things are ready for harvest and things like that too.
So I want to go back to a couple of things that you said. First was the app. Which app do you like?
So I use Google Lens as my app because it links right to my phone's camera. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
I didn't know if I was allowed to promote a random app. So I was like, I'm going to totally digress on that.
Then when you said you were in Arizona, what kind of plants did you see or that interested you?
I actually made a reel on my Facebook Instagram page of some of the plants that I found when I was in Tucson. And so among those were, of course, things like the variety of cacti that's there. There's, of course, saguaro, which has been used as a food plant for a long time. But there's also things like agave. There's things like prickly pear. And then there's trees like mesquite, which at one point was considered by settlers to be kind of a nuisance plant because they grow all over. But mesquite, besides having edible pods that you can grind down and you can make flour out of, besides having wood that is used for smoking, they're a legume, which means that they actually pull nitrogen out of the air and they enrich the soil with nitrogen. So they help fertilize the soil and the land for all the other plants. So those are a few that I remember just offhand, but there's definitely a lot of really cool and interesting plants, and I think it helps me feel more grounded in an area when I know them.
So, yeah, we also do something a little similar to you all called Food for Thought, a little different, but using indigenous ingredients and trying to focus on the Southwest. And in fact, we have our Food for Thought running tomorrow, and we're doing the prickly pear and the chia seed jelly. And then we also did,
Ooh, yeah.
we do a lot with the mesquite as well. And we just had a guest on talking about, I had asked her like in the kitchen, which was her success story. And then she went on to tell me about the mesquite pods and how her house got infested by some of the bugs. So it was really, I always learn a lot from doing this. And then I also wanted to mention that when you talked about the website, the Indian Ag, great website. We often order at Native Health a lot of things. We go on that website, look at the directory, and then purchase from different vendors listed on there. So like Sika Hills for the olive oil and Navajo Mike's, barbecue sauce in Phoenix and things like that. So good tips on that. So it sounds like you really enjoy experimenting with local indigenous foods. So are there a lot of health benefits in using indigenous ingredients?
I think anytime you're using indigenous ingredients, you're inherently using less processed ingredients and fresher things, right? Things that are classified as indigenous ingredients are inherently things that can be grown or wild harvested or hunted. And the processing can be done basically in your own kitchen, even if you're making sausage or things like that. Those are things that you can do in your own kitchen. Our food preservation techniques were pretty much drying, and now we have freezing, right? We weren't packing things full of preservatives in order to keep them from breaking down on us. Anytime we're working with ingredients like that, yes, they're healthier. But also, indigenous ingredients are also inherently higher in protein, lower in fat, which just, essentially means lower in calories, and higher in fiber, and contain a lot of those important vitamins and minerals that we may not necessarily be getting from ultra-processed food at a grocery store.
Those are all really good points, and I hope people start cooking with different indigenous ingredients. How can people find recipes? Do you have a certain place where people should look, or any tips, or just take a recipe and then swap it out for an indigenous ingredient versus something else in the recipe? What suggestions or advice do you have?
I actually think the latter option is a great way of doing things, and it's something I do quite frequently. But I did make my website accessible to people just so they would be able to Google indigenous recipes. So my work is available at indigikitchen.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram and things like that, YouTube at Indigikitchen. And so it's really easy to find recipes, and I don't have it monetized, so you don't have to deal with ads popping up, and you don't have to read my life story to find the recipe itself. But the other thing, and it's the latter option that you suggested, is to find a recipe you like and to swap it with indigenous ingredients. It is really easy if you see a recipe for ground beef to swap it for ground bison, or maybe you have deer meat, you have venison in your freezer because someone in your family hunted. Swap that ingredient, and not only are you unlikely to notice the swap, but if you do notice, you'll probably realize that that wild game meat is even richer in flavor, and it's easy to work with. I mean, you can brown bison meat, you can brown up deer meat, and you don't have to drain the fat off of it because there's not really any fat there. So there's a lot of good swaps that you can do just by switching things there. And that's a great way of starting if you're kind of nervous about working with new ingredients. You can look up ways to work with squash, or ways to work with corn, ways to incorporate more beans into your diet. I grew up, I did not like beans. I don't like eating beans in their very normal bean form. And so I made a cake recipe using beans that I blended up in a blender and mixed maple syrup with, just because I was like, I don't like the bean texture. But if I turn it into cake, I get all the benefits of beans, but also it gets to be cake instead of beans. So there's a lot of creative things that you can do. 60% of the food that's eaten around the world originated in North and South America. A lot of the things that people already eat are indigenous foods, but they may not recognize the history of those foods or necessarily how to work with them.
I like the idea that you had the indigenous foods potluck where everybody brought something.
Yes.
How was that? Was that a pretty good experience, and do you recommend doing that at a potluck?
Yeah, so I've actually had a couple of those that I've been a part of. One of them was at the USDA Office of Tribal Relations, and that was super fun because people there are, of course, so well connected with Native foods. Another one of them was with kind of an organization of retired women in a local community in Montana, and they were fun because none of them were Native. They were just trying to gain a better appreciation of indigenous foods, and so they wanted to support Native food producers, and they wanted to learn how to work with some of the local ingredients. And so that was kind of interesting, but it was cool. And then another one of them was with grad students that I went to school with, and we were all Native grad students, and so we kind of just had to get together and did that. But I think that that's so fun, especially when you get Natives from different communities coming together, because everyone has different recipes from their home communities that are indigenous to them, right? They're things that they will have brought from their grandparents or wherever they lived before they moved to where you're having the potluck. And so that's a cool way of getting to try indigenous foods from so many different places, but also to hear it from the people preparing those foods. You know, when your friends kind of say, hey, I brought this and it's made of this, and you kind of have your little presentation of the foods, which is half the fun, is just getting to hear, you know, this is how we always made it, and my grandma taught me how to do this, and this is how we do it. And then you get to try it. And I think there's something so culturally important about sharing foods, but also you have a more vested interest in liking foods when your friends made them. And so I think that part's important too.
That's pretty cool. So what's been your most, in all of your commercial work, your most successful recipe or something that hasn't worked so well?
Ooh.
Or both.
So one of my most successful recipes actually has been dark chocolate pumpkin seed brownies, which, you know, you're using pumpkin seed flour, which is something that I don't think a lot of people normally work with, but it's dense. It's kind of like almond flour, but because it's nut-free, you can use it as a substitute and bring it into schools and all of that. And so the brownies that I've made are just, you know, they're held together with a little bit of tapioca starch. It's just a starch from a root vegetable. And then they're sweetened with maple syrup. They have cocoa powder, which actually kind of makes up part of the flour. Of course, cocoa and chocolate is indigenous from Central America. And there's water and a little bit of oil. But altogether, it's entirely a vegan, nut-free, high-protein recipe that has gotten rave reviews from everyone that's tried it, including little kids all the way up through adults. And, you know, we've made this recipe at huge commercial venues in Yellowstone National Park, in big event venues in Las Vegas. We've used it a lot, but also used it in school lunch programs and used it to teach culinary classes for middle schoolers and things like that. And it's great because it's a dessert, it's a sweet treat, but it's dark chocolate, and it's also accompanied with all of these good proteins and minerals that come with pumpkin seeds. And so it's just really been fun to see that recipe. Things that haven't been successful is something I'm working on right now, which I haven't pulled off yet. I'm trying to make basically lemon squares, but lemons aren't indigenous. I'm trying to use sumac and to figure out how to make like the perfect sumac square. But I have not successfully done that yet. So I'm trying to get everything perfect to figure out how to balance all of the liquid ingredients from substituting maple syrup in for a granulated sugar and how to balance it so it's not too tart. And then, of course, the crust and trying to figure out a shortbread crust without any butter, flour, or sugar, which are the ingredients of shortbread. So that's my fun thing that I've been working on. I've gotten close. It should be out soon if I ever figure out the exact perfect ratio.
I would think that would be fun to figure out, like the sumac with maybe tapioca, because you said you used that before. And then the crust, what is that, pumpkin Ground pumpkin seed?
I've been using pumpkin seed flour. Yeah,
Okay.
and I actually was using tallow in that crust, and I think that the tallow wasn't absorbing as much as I wanted it to into that flour. So I'm going to work a little bit with coconut oil and kind of do like a salted coconut oil and maybe try the shortbread with that. Last time, I thought my crust was baked, and because it was looking like it was browning, and then I went to pour the top layer of the actual sumac, like the squares themselves, on top of the crust. And it turns out my crust, it had not cooled down enough to re-solidify, so my crust just kind of became incorporated into the rest of the sumac squares, which was not ideal. So I had to walk away from that project for a little bit.
But like you said, all you're throwing out is just a little bit of stuff, and you might come up with a great recipe.
Yeah, I get to wake up and I'm like, I think this would work. And I've tried some things that have not worked at all, and then I've tried some things where I'm like, this came together really well on the first try, and I'm not going to change a thing about it because it seems to be what I want it to be. So my family gets to be subjected to a lot of experimentation, that's for sure.
That's a good thing. So I noticed that you're sort of moving into doing in-person classes, right?
Yeah, I've been doing in-person classes for quite a few years now, but it was nice because I started off with this digital format that when COVID canceled a lot of my in-person work, I was already set up to do everything virtually because that's how I started. But yeah, I'm definitely back doing in-person classes, and I've been doing some catering gigs as well, which is a little bit outside of my comfort zone, but I'm getting a lot more used to it and learning some of the fine details of pulling off big catering events.
Pretty impressive. So I know that when I spoke with you on the phone, you mentioned that you're coming out with the children's cookbook. Is that correct? Did I get it right?
Yeah, it should be printed by the new year, and then I'll be able to send out some of the pre-orders that are going out. But there's about a little over 40 recipes using ingredients that are indigenous to Turtle Island, but in a whole bunch of really kid-friendly recipes, both kid-friendly to eat and kid-friendly to make.
Okay, what's the name of the book?
The name of the book is Mountains to Oceans, Kids' Recipes from Native Land.
And where can you buy it?
So right now it's available for pre-order on my website at indigikitchen.com, but it will be available on Amazon as well when it gets printed.
Okay, so Mountains to Oceans. Sorry, what was the rest of it?
Kids' Recipes from Native Land.
Kids' Recipes. Sorry, I'm just typing it into Amazon as you're talking. All right. And should be available in like 2 weeks?
Yeah,
2 or 3 weeks.
It depends on how fast shipping things is. It's self-published, so it's been navigating, figuring out book layouts and all the fun things with my design team. But yeah, it will be available in the new year. It's already available for pre-order on my website, though. So.
And your website is IndigiKitchen?
IndigiKitchen.com. Yep.
.com. Okay. I'm super excited to learn more about it. So, favorite recipe in that book? Or do you not have
favorite
one?
recipe in that book? That's a good question. I think that one of my favorite recipes is it's a marinated steak and bell pepper roll-up. And it's fun because you get to smash steak really thin, marinate it in this delicious sauce, and then you get to assemble by rolling the little steak strips up with bell peppers and onions if you want. And then you just cook them really briefly in a pan. And then you have these really fun and super delicious snacks with little, they have little toothpicks through them to hold them together. But they're just so good, and you can eat them as a snack. You can eat them as part of a full meal. They're just super yummy and colorful, and they're fun to make because they can be assembled really easily. And yeah, I love those so much. But also, one of my all-time favorite recipes that's also in that book, and it's something that I've actually had available on my website for a little bit, but I decided to include it in the kids' cookbook because it's so relevant to kids' snack foods and it comes together so fast, is a sunflower butter caramel popcorn. So it's just a sunflower butter caramel that's made with maple syrup and sunflower butter. You can use peanut butter too if you want. And you basically heat that up in a stovetop and spread it over. Essentially, you can air pop the popcorn, or the recipe substitutes perfectly for a bag of popcorn in the microwave if you have that. You pour it into a big grocery-sized bag, and then you just get to shake the heck out of it to coat this popcorn in this delicious sunflower butter caramel. And then you have like this sweet, snacky treat that's made. And of course, there's protein actually in that because you're incorporating the sunflower butter. But it is just such a yummy, sweet snack food. And there's, the tactile shaking of the bag that I think makes it so much more fun just to be able to kind of get a little bit crazy. It's a good task for anyone of any age.
That sounds pretty fun. I'm thinking, we do a program called Read It and Eat, and I think that might be a good project for the younger kids to do. Make the popcorn and make that. I've not heard of that, so I'm going to have to check out that recipe out of your cookbook. What else are you planning in IndigiKitchen coming? I know you've got the cookbook. I know you're doing the videos. You're doing catering and in person. Anything else that you've got planned for the next few years?
I'm working on doing an updated toolkit for food service directors to incorporate more Indigenous foods into their school meal programs. There's been some changes with some of the USDA crediting guidelines that schools are given, and so I worked with Montana No Kid Hungry a few years ago to put together a toolkit that would make crediting and sourcing and all of that very easy when it came to Indigenous ingredients. And so now I'm working with Montana Partnership to End Childhood Hunger to update that toolkit and to be able to really create a resource that makes it simple for food service directors to be able to look at some sample menus, to have scaled recipes. There's actually a resource on my website already that has, it's kind of a Excel spreadsheet that food service directors can download, and then you can put, I have 147 kids in this school and I have to cook for them. So you can put in the number 147 and it will automatically scale the recipes for you for some of these Indigenous recipes that I have. And we'll be expanding that as well so that it will have about 2 weeks worth of recipes that food service directors will be able to use for both breakfasts and lunches. And then some creative ways of helping offset costs and stuff for some of that. Those Indigenous ingredients themselves. So I'm really excited about that. That will be also coming together in the next couple of months. We'll have a republished version of that toolkit available online as well.
That sounds like a great toolkit for schools and food and commercial food service. And thinking, people down here could adapt it. Obviously, the ingredients are different and the resources, but what a great idea. I have learned so much. I can't wait to go check out your website, and I am going to go pre-order your book today, so I can look at that. Yep, can't wait, and then I'll order it off Amazon again and get a second copy. We really appreciate you coming on and telling us about what you've been doing, the work that you do, highlighting Indigenous ingredients, recipes, and again, how can listeners learn more about IndigiKitchen, view your videos, and how can they contact you?
My website is indigikitchen.com, so that's INDIGI kitchen.com. And then I'm at Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all at IndigiKitchen. So you can find recipes, videos, interesting resources, fun pictures, stories, all of that there. And then my email address is info@indigikitchen.com. But if someone's interested in booking a cooking class or lecture or something like that, there's also a booking form really easily available on my website as well.
Well, I learned a lot. I'm going to try the popcorn, I think, with the sunflower seed butter and the caramel. But I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're up north. It's probably snowing, but we appreciate you coming on and telling us about IndigiKitchen. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Native Talk Arizona, presented by Native Health and 90.7 FM KRDP. Our executive producer is Susan Levy. Sound engineer is Javier Quiroga. We hope you will tune in again next week. If you have any questions, please reach us at nativetalkaz@listen2krdp.com.